Hi there, thanks for joining us on Let's Talk Taste with Sherry, where we're saving the earth one flavor at a time by gathering community to share wisdom around the natural connections between our innate sense of taste and flavors that are grown in healthy regenerative soils. Welcome. Hey there, Sherry Hess with The Flavor Remedy. Thanks again for joining me for another episode of Let's Talk Taste with Sherry. Today is a day I have been waiting for and so excited to have a special guest today. I haven't really gone into this in detail yet on the show, but I actually, when I first stepped into the entrepreneurial world, I was creating spice blends. And in the process of creating these spice blends for purpose of flavor and also health benefits, I was looking for really good sources. And I came across Ethan Frisch of Burlap and Barrel. And it's like one of the best days of my life. So welcome, Ethan, to the show. I'm so excited to have you.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you and great to get to catch up.
It's awesome. I'm so excited. So here's the thing about Ethan, and I'm going to let him tell the story. But when I was doing spices and when I was looking for sources that were reputable, sustainable, good quality, it's not an easy thing to find. And when I came across Burlap and Barrel, my mind was a little bit blown. So I would love it if you would give us a little bit of your origin story, how you got started, and how you came up with this very specific niche around spices.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, spices are really the forgotten corner of our pantry. I mean, we've had these revolutions in coffee and tea and cacao. You would never buy a bottle of wine if you didn't know where it came from. But people don't know anything about spices. They don't know how they're grown. They don't know where they come from. They don't even often realize that they are agricultural products that come from farms in the first place, that there's a farmer behind your cinnamon or your black pepper. So it seemed like an area of food that had a lot of opportunity. My background is half in restaurant kitchens and half in international development. So I'd worked in high-end restaurants in New York. I worked at a high-end Indian restaurant, which was one of my early introductions to spices. But was always sort of I don't know, confused by restaurants that knew everything about where their meat came from, knew the name of the farmer who raised the pig that we were serving for dinner, but I really had no idea where their spices were coming from. We're buying pretty low quality stuff, essentially grocery store quality. And then I left kitchens, really not thinking that spices were going to be the defining thing in my career. But I left kitchens, wanted to go become an aid worker. So I went to graduate school, got a degree in international development, and then moved to Afghanistan. And again, thinking that my cooking days were behind me. This was it. I was on a new career path, and I think, as a lot of people who have traveled will appreciate this. You start tasting things that taste different. The ingredients are different. The cooking styles are different. And so while I was living in Afghanistan, I was spending a lot of time in the far northeast of the country, a very mountainous province called Badakhshan, which within Afghanistan is famous for this variety of cumin that grows wild way up in the mountains and is harvested in a pretty short window of time at the end of the summer. Just by foragers, families who live in the mountains and raise sheep and will grow some crops, but then foraging for cumin is a big part of their livelihoods and their lifestyle. And I started to bring it home to New York to share with friends in the restaurant industry, who were blown away, and I was blown away by the fact that I, knowing basically nothing about how the spice trade was supposed to work, or really anything at all at that point, that I could bring something home in a backpack that a chef in New York would get excited about. Presumably a restaurant that would have access to any ingredient they could possibly imagine, and it turned out they didn't. And so those conversations with my chef friends about how much they loved this cumin and how much they wanted better spices, and then at the other end, conversations with farmers, or in this case foragers, who had done a lifetime of work to learn how to grow or harvest this ingredient, and knew, in almost every case, knew that there was a higher value market, knew that people would pay more for this somewhere else in the world, in the US or in Europe or somewhere else, but had no idea how to get there, how to get their product to that market. And so that was the original kernel of the idea. The seed was conversations with chefs who wanted better ingredients, conversations with farmers who were growing incredible stuff and had no way to get it to those chefs. And I said, I've done both of these things. I speak both of these languages, so to speak, and maybe I could put these two groups of people together. And so that's what I started working on. It took several years to go from that original idea, which was, somewhere in 2012, 2013, to actually starting a company in 2016. But that's where it started.
That's so awesome. I had no idea about the foraging part. So you're talking about people that are not like planting crops. They're going out and just finding these things and gathering them, literally gathering spices.
Yep.
That is so
the
cool.
The cumin is a sort of a shrub, a small shrub. And in July and into August, you get these lacy white flowers. So you see them on kind of the hillsides in the mountains in Badakhshan in Afghanistan. And then the flowers get pollinated, obviously, and each flower turns into a tiny individual cumin seed. And so later in the summer, kind of mid to late August, after the flowers have been pollinated and the seeds have popped out and have started to dry on the plant, people will go out and pull these plants, either kind of pull the top off the plant or break off the stalk, and then shake the seeds off of it. And it's a multi-step process to sort out all the little pieces of grass and everything else.
Right.
But that's how it works.
That's amazing. So I have it here, the wild mountain cumin, right?
Yeah, we get
it's so intense. I have props.
No, I love it. No, we get accused of sort of marketing speak. Oh, wild mountain cumin. What does it mean? No, but it's actually wild cumin from the mountains. And that is
amazing.
And it's a different species than most people have tried before too. So it's also a very different flavor. It's a little kind of more piney, more herbal. It looks and tastes quite different from the standard cumin that most people have tried.
I so love it. And what I love about that too is that immediately takes away the aspect of like farmed versus wild, right? Like that's becoming a really important conversation in the world of food in general, right? Like we're looking for wild caught salmon. We're looking for, herbs, even herbs, like herbs and spices and things that are kind of in the supplement world, right? Like I have a friend of mine who is literally in India trying to save these Ayurvedic herbs because so many people are just going out there and like raping the land, right? And these rare medicinal herbs are becoming extinct, and he's trying to cultivate them and keep them going. And so I love that immediately takes out that whole idea of how are they farming and what are they doing and how are they, treating the earth. So the richness and the flavor of this cumin then is just coming from, it's obviously growing on its own. It's choosing where to grow. It's letting nature do its thing. And as a result, the flavor is intense. I mean, it is crazy good cumin. Yeah. And it's smaller than most cumin seeds that you see, right? It's like this small little powerful punch.
Yep, it's a tiny kind of pointy little seed, and I think even more so than just the natural distribution of the seeds. I mean, this is always a concern when we're talking about any ingredient, but particularly a wild harvested ingredient. How much is being harvested? Are we thinking, to the future seasons or years in advance? But I think the nice thing about cumin and the fact that what's being harvested is the seed is that as it's being harvested, seeds are falling off the plants. As it's being carried back to the village, seeds are falling out of the sack that you're carrying them in. So there is this kind of symbiotic relationship between the harvesting and the distribution of seeds for future harvests for the next year.
That's so cool. That is just amazing. I love that. I had no idea. What a beautiful segue into the way we're treating food and what you do, right? So what I love about Burlap and Barrel is that every single spice that you're doing, right? You are going out there and you are creating a relationship with each farm. And if I'll just show this real quick. So on this, on the label, you have exactly where each spice is coming from. So the farmer, exactly the location, everything about, kind of like you said in the beginning, like we have all these, ways to track coffee and cocoa beans and things, and you're doing it with every single spice that you are doing. And there's so much benefit to that for the consumer and the farmer, right? I would love if you would just kind of like bring that in, and then we're going to talk about one of my favorite spices. But talk to me a little bit about that.
So the commodity supply chain for spices works pretty much the same way that any agricultural commodity supply chain works. A farmer grows a fairly small quantity of whatever the crop is. If we're talking about black pepper or cinnamon or cardamom or rice or wheat or really anything, farmer grows a fairly small quantity, sells it on to a local buyer, a consolidator, a middleman, if you want to call them that. But there are more specific roles that each person tends to play in the supply chain. So a truck will drive through the area where these crops grow during the harvest season, buy whatever each farmer has grown, throw it into the back of the truck. It all gets mixed together. There's really no conversation about quality. It's all about quantity. So you get paid as a farmer, you get paid based purely on how much you grow, not what variety or how good it tastes or whether you grow organically or anything. All of that is off the table for the commodity supply chain. All they care about is volumes. And that truck driver sells on to somebody with a little warehouse or a storeroom in the back of a shop or something like that, who's buying from a dozen truck drivers. Each truck driver is buying from a couple of dozen farmers. So essentially you have a funneling effect where a lot of farmers at the top of the funnel, and the product gets kind of consolidated until you get to the bottom of the funnel, the export process. And spice exports are almost always controlled by pretty big, long-standing companies that have been around for decades, if not centuries. This model is very specifically based on the colonial model of ships sailing from Europe to Asia to Africa to fill up with spices and bring them home. And going into that history all the way back, there were these obstacles set up that whoever happened to be the trader would try to keep other people from getting to their source. And so, you read some of these medieval stories about fire-breathing dragons guarding pepper farms, and that was their sort of explanation for why black pepper is black, is the fire-breathing dragon would burn all the pepper with their fire breath.
I love that.
But these were real stories that traders told to keep other people from trying to go around them. And
Right.
And there were similar stories for cinnamon and nutmeg, huge eagles and monsters and all kinds of things. But the history of the spice trade is really one of monopolies that were built and then broken and built and then broken. And it's also important to mention that we tend, just by virtue of who we are and our culture, we tend to look at this with a fairly Eurocentric view. But the records show that for every one ship full of pepper that was going from India to Europe, there were 10 ships going to China and 10 ships going to the Middle East. And so Europe and now in North America, which we see as big commercial centers, have always been fairly small in the global spice trade and have never been the primary destination for spices. So that's the commodities trade. It's a mess. It's always been a mess. It really has changed remarkably little in many hundreds of years. But what has been able to happen really in the last 5 or 10 years, not much longer than that, because of cheap smartphones, and easy communication technology like this conversation that we're having now, but really simple stuff, WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger, things that didn't exist until pretty recently, have changed that whole system. So in the past, you had to go through these layers of middlemen because that was the only person you were able to get in touch with, and they got in touch with their person who got in touch with their person. But today, I can call up a farmer in Vietnam and say, what are you growing? How much can I buy? And that's how it works. So as you mentioned, we do spend a lot of time on the road, visiting our partner farmers, meeting new potential partner farmers, really getting to understand as much as we can what their process is and how they're growing, what they're growing, and why they're growing it in the way that they are. And then setting them up to export their own crops for the first time. Most of them have never exported before. And then buying as much as we can. In many cases these days, we're buying their entire harvest, importing it to the US and supplying it to restaurants and home cooks and anybody else who cares about not only where their spices come from, but who's looking for something with a distinctive flavor, more intensity, something that actually tastes good. Supermarket spices, that whole commodity supply chain takes years, literally years. So a farmer will grow something, they'll sit on it for a few months. I mean, this is also one of the reasons that the supply chain takes so long for commodity spices is that farmers are pretty powerless in this whole system. So as a pepper farmer, you're growing a global commodity. And if you are a Vietnamese pepper farm, you're competing with pepper farms in Brazil and India and Indonesia And so the weather in Brazil is going to change how much money you make in a given year, because if Brazil has great weather and a great harvest, there's going to be an increase in supply on the global market. Prices are going to go down and you're going to make less money. So the only tool that a farmer has really at their disposal is to stockpile their inventory. So if the prices are really low this year, everybody's had a good harvest. The only thing you can do is wait to sell it. So you'll sell a little bit to pay your bills or whatever you need, and then you'll sit on the rest of your stock, the rest of your crop, until the off season or the following year, hoping that prices go up and you can make a little more money. So the downside of that, obviously, for the farmer is that they're making less money. And then the downside for us as cooks is that we're getting something that's been sitting around for years. And then it takes another 2 years to go through that whole shipping process and come to the US. So if you buy spices at the supermarket, they're easily 3 years old.
Wow.
And they weren't that good to begin with. So really, what are you working with?
Right.
There are a lot of upsides for the farmer and ultimately for the consumer in getting something faster and fresher, and that was really good when you started that journey. That you weren't.
Oh my gosh! And so what I also love about this, and is that because you're working directly with these farmers and you're taking away this timestamp, this huge, like when I talk about living flavors, right? So a living flavor is the closest thing to the thing that has just been harvested, right? This something that is grown in these rich soils and these places where they're meant to be grown in the tropical climates, and the climates where they're meant to be grown. So everything about it is so beautiful and natural and rich. And by these people having to deal with the commodity prices, sell, based on timing of the market, stockpile their things, let it sit, the longer it sits, the less flavor it has, the less life it has, right? So there's so much good. There's just so much good about what you're doing. You're giving these farmers a much better opportunity, right? You're giving them fair prices in the market. They're not having to deal with the commodity pricing and everything. When we were talking to Maureen Maloney from The Voice of Vanilla, she talked about how these farmers have to hand brand the beans so that they can identify them in case they're stolen or, as they go to market. It's insane what we as the consumer are so disconnected from the lives of these people that are doing this, right? And it's generations of farmers that have been raising these things and growing these things and have figured out how to make them taste good and what the soil capacity is to make this right? So that takes me into my favorite spice, because I know, and it's hard to pick a favorite spice with Burlap and Barrel. I got to tell you, like every single one that you taste, you're like, oh my God, like sometimes you had no idea that a spice actually tasted like that because there's so much flavor to it. But since I have been with you, I have wandered through several different versions, so to speak, really. They're varieties, farms, single sourced, products of cinnamon. And when you released Royal Cinnamon, and I kind of watched, like, because you tell your stories, like on Instagram, you guys are, I mean, there's videos of you on your mopeds driving through these, tropical forests and in Vietnam and Africa. And we almost went to Africa together. That didn't quite work out, but it's just so cool because you're seeing these lives and you're seeing these environments and you're seeing the realness of what these farmers are experiencing. So I want you to tell me stories of cinnamon.
Cinnamon is a particularly interesting ingredient for a lot of reasons. First of all, there are 4 commercially cultivated species, which most people have no idea. When we talk about black pepper, we talk about cardamom, most other spices, there's one species, and then there might be different varieties, but it's just one species. Cinnamon, there are 4 different species. They all grow in different places, and they taste pretty significantly different. So you'll get Ceylon cinnamon, Sri Lankan cinnamon, which is the Cinnamomum verum, sometimes called true cinnamon, although it's really a misnomer. They're all the genus Cinnamomum. None of them is more true than any other, but whoever the botanist was who gave it its Latin name in the hundreds of years ago decided that this was the real one. So they called it cinnamon verum.
And that's a tool in marketing. Like that is people really look for that type of cinnamon.
Yeah. And there are certain health benefits associated with it, which I think is part of that pull, but it's really remarkable how this sort of name, the true label, makes people think that the other cinnamons are false, which is not true at all. So there's the true cinnamon, the Ceylon cinnamon. Ours comes from a sort of an agroforestry cooperative in Zanzibar, Tanzania, where we had planned to go together. Right. Hopefully we will still get to go together. Then there's Cinnamomum burmani, which is from Indonesia, sometimes called Kerinci cinnamon, if anybody has seen that label. There's Chinese cinnamon, cassia cinnamon, and then there's Cinnamomum lururoi, which is the heirloom Vietnamese cinnamon. And there's a fair amount of confusion there as well, because there are two species of cinnamon grown in Vietnam. There's Cinnamomum cassia, which is the Chinese variety, but grown in Vietnam. And I would say almost 100% of what you buy in the US as Saigon cinnamon or Vietnamese cinnamon is Cinnamomum cassia. But there is another species of cinnamon grown in Vietnam, which is really the heritage cinnamon from Vietnam, which is Cinnamomum lururoi. It grows in a different part of the country, and the flavor is really remarkably different. Super sweet, super spicy.
That's the royal cinnamon,
and
right?
That's the royal cinnamon, and it's called royal cinnamon because it was grown in this part of Vietnam, in Quang Nam, for the royal court, the historic royal court in Hue. They wanted the best cinnamon, and they got it. So one of the variables when it comes to cinnamon is the species, but another variable is the age of the tree. Cinnamon is the inner bark of a tree. The trees look a little bit different depending on the species, but generally it's a tall, straight, kind of quintessential tree with big kind of pointy leaves. And cinnamon trees can be harvested starting somewhere around 7 years old. The trees, for most of those species, the trees have to be cut down to harvest them. So the trees are cut down, the bark is stripped off and then dried. The outer bark is then kind of scraped off, so you're left with just the inner bark, and that's where all of that incredible flavor, all of the oil is concentrated in that inner bark, that layer. But younger trees haven't had enough time to develop all of those oils, all of the complexity, all of the intensity of flavor. So the older the tree is, the better the cinnamon is going to taste, and the stronger the cinnamon is going to taste. So the royal cinnamon is not only a Cinnamomum lururoi species, but also from trees that are 20 plus years old. And so, I mean, to your point about the long-standing nature of growing spices, cinnamon is very specifically an intergenerational crop. It takes 20 years to ripen, so to speak. So you have situations where parents are planting trees that their kids are going to harvest. We met a cinnamon farmer in Vietnam who walked us around a plot of land, a farm, but it looked like a forest with all these big trees. The trees were, 15 or 17 years old. She had planted them, bought these little trees as seedlings, planted them 15 years ago. Her investment literally grew, and then she had just gifted this plot of land to her daughter as a wedding present. Wow. So it sort of facilitates this intergenerational transfer of wealth, a way for parents to provide for their kids, and create these beautiful flavors, because it's also not just the trees, not just the land that's being passed down, but also all of that knowledge and expertise of how to grow them.
And that is so amazing. And it again, I hate to keep referring back, but it's so similar to the story with the vanilla with Maureen, because she said they're doing the same thing. They're so reverent about taking care of the land and thinking about the past and the future. Like, this is generations of flavor being grown, right? So I just, that royal cinnamon, I eat it every day. It is the most intense range of flavor in a cinnamon that I've ever had. And I just, I don't know. I can't say enough about that cinnamon, and I give it to everyone that I know. But so what I'm curious about is, so there's this long-standing, obviously, I mean, these trees are 20 years old. So is there a difference? There's obviously a difference in the genus and the type of cinnamon that it is. But what would you say about the difference in, like, growing situations? Like, are you seeing in all the cinnamons, maybe not just the ones in Vietnam, but and because you have some from Zanzibar too, right? So are you seeing differences in flavor based upon the terroir, kind of like grapes? Like, I feel like this is similar to wine growers and grapes. The longer the established grapevine is, right, the big, thick, old, gnarly grapevines are where, like, they make the wines that are the most complex and the most, they charge the most for as well. So like, do you see a correlation in that, in what these
Yeah,
farmers are doing?
absolutely. I mean, you see that terroir factor a little more clearly in black pepper because it is all the same species, and so you can taste those flavor differences from the terroir a little more clearly. But there's Cinnamomum verum grown in Sri Lanka, in India, in Tanzania, in Mexico, and it will all taste a little bit different based on where it grows and how much rain there was and how much sun there was and all these other factors. And cinnamon, because it does sort of, it's not a wild crop, but it's also not cared for in the way that you would imagine a regular farmers caring for their crops, because it takes at minimum 7 years. So you plant the tree and then you kind of forget about it until you're ready to harvest it. And so they do just sort of integrate into the environment. They don't look like farms; they look like forests.
Right, which is
and in Zanzibar, all of the spices are intercropped, kind of in a true forest environment. It's really just the jungle, and you walk into the jungle, and it feels like this sort of impenetrable screen of green, of trees and bushes and plants, all kinds of stuff. And then you start to realize, oh wait, that's a cinnamon tree, and there's a pepper vine climbing up the cinnamon tree, and there's a vanilla vine over here, and here's a clove tree. And they're all just kind of mixed in together in the woods. And the cooperative
forest.
Yeah, exactly. There's some cardamom plants too. I mean, you really could put together a pretty nice chai. And the farmers who we work with are really more like caretakers of the forest. There's 29 farmers in the co-op. Each one kind of has an area that they manage, but they don't farm it in the traditional sense. And each of those spices has kind of a different season, and so it also helps ensure that they have income throughout the year, and they're always harvesting something, and then onto the next plant, onto the next crop.
That's so amazing. So I can imagine that these farmers that have been growing these things for 20 years are probably pretty appreciative of the fact that you're working directly with them, right? And I seem to recall, wasn't there a story about one of the cinnamon farmers didn't necessarily want to sell to you, or you had to really explain that this was a different situation?
So it's always a funny conversation. The first conversation with a new potential partner farmer. Most farmers have only dealt with that commodity supply chain, selling to the local truck driver or broker, whoever it is. And then we show up and here's our idea, and what do you think? And we get a lot of we get mixed results, let's say. Some farmers are pretty confused by it. Some farmers just don't want to have anything to do with it. The commodity system isn't great, but it's the thing that they know.
Right.
But the farmers who wind up being the best partners for us are the ones where we show up on the farm and say, here's what we're thinking about doing. And they say, what the hell took you so long to get here? I had this idea 15 years ago. I just haven't been able to find somebody to do it with me. And then we're off to the races. Then it's great. We wind up working.
Was that the case with the Royal Cinnamon family, or?
It's been the case in most of the spices that we source, because the way that we work with our partner farmers is we pay them a whole lot more than they'd make through the commodity market, but we also ask them or offer for them to take on more responsibility and more control, have more power in the supply chain. They have always initiated it, but they've never had any power in it. And so what we're proposing is, we'll buy your cinnamon at whatever, I don't remember the exact numbers, but 10 times the commodity price. But we only want the 20-year-old trees. We want you to do the exporting yourself. So are you able to do that? Are you willing to do that? That often requires extra steps in terms of sorting and cleaning and packing, grinding, these little things that really are value added processes for a farmer. There are ways for a farmer to make a little bit more money by preparing a product that's closer to being ready for the consumer, right, than what they might have done in the past. The best partners for us are the farmers who are super opinionated. So you'll have a conversation with a farmer. Why do you plant in this way, or why are the plants so far apart? And they'll go, I don't know. That's how everybody does it. And then you go to another farmer. Why are you doing it this way? And they give you a 2-hour lecture on why the plants are 12 centimeters apart and not 11 and not 13, and here's all the reasons, and this is why I do it, and everybody else is crazy, they're doing it wrong, they're ruining it. And those are the people I fall in love with. Those are the people with the
flavor, right?
Exactly.
The ones that understand the soil, the ones that understand everything that they can do to make the best quality, or working with the soil.
Exactly.
Right? You just justified my existence. All of my guests that I get on this show have come to this full circle idea, right? Like this whole idea that the people that are taking care of the planet, and that's not just the farmer, Ethan, that's you, because you are doing this in a way that is breaking down the systems, that is, giving these people that are doing the right thing an opportunity to make more money, to have more power in this whole thing. And it's coming from food grown the way it's
I'll tell you a story about the turmeric farmer we work with in India, because he's one of those super opinionated. He knows the right way to do everything, but had been in this kind of funny situation with his neighbors. There are a lot of people growing turmeric around him. And this, I'm telling the story about him, but we see this in a lot of cases where he is really the only one growing turmeric in this particular way. Everybody else is using herbicides or pesticides and growing for volume and just doing what the commodity market tells them to. And for years, decades even, they have kind of laughed at him. They've thought that he was crazy. They didn't understand why he was doing it like this. And so when we went to visit exactly a year ago, March 2020, right before everything shut down, we were in India on a sourcing trip and then had to come home ahead of schedule. Anyway, he almost literally paraded us through the village. He was so thrilled that we were there, both because he was happy to hang out with us, but also because he wanted to rub it in everybody else's faces that they had been laughing at him. They had been saying that he was doing it wrong for all this time. And here we are paying, I don't know what we're paying, 10 times or 12 times what everybody else is getting paid for their turmeric, because his is worth it, because it's that much better. It justifies the price. And so he was just having a ball rubbing it in everybody's faces that these guys came from the US. Not only were they paying him a ton more money, but they also, we also had made this trip and we're there to get to know him and get to know the farm.
That's awesome.
He was really loving it.
So is this the gentleman, is this the Blue Turmeric?
This is the New Harvest turmeric, the regular variety of turmeric from India. His name is Dr. Salunkhe. He's speaking of soil and of an interest in the overlap between health and flavor, his background is as an Ayurvedic pharmacologist. So that's his training. And he had a career. He's probably in his 50s, I would say. He had a career as an Ayurvedic pharmacist, right, prescribing Ayurvedic treatments, and I think had just gotten more and more disillusioned with solving problems that were created, sort of artificially created, by problems in supply chains, and particularly food supply chains. And so he said, screw this. I'm going to be the farmer. I'm done with trying to fix problems that already exist. How can I prevent them? How can I change the system literally from the ground up? And so that's what he does. He grows an heirloom variety of turmeric called a Salem turmeric. He as much as possible, he's very focused on rain-fed as opposed to irrigated agriculture, which sometimes is possible, sometimes not, depending on kind of annual rainfall. He intercrops the turmeric, or I should say rotates the turmeric, with sugarcane and with peanuts. The peanuts introduce nitrogen back into the soil. The sugarcane does something else, I don't remember. But he's got this crop rotation cycle. He also, which I'd never seen anywhere else, he has this interesting practice with the turmeric where he sort of cures it in the soil after it's ready to harvest.
I remember you talking about that. Yeah.
Most turmeric is pulled out of the ground basically as soon as it's ready. What he does is he lets the plant, the leaf part of the turmeric, because turmeric is a rhizome under the ground. He lets the leaves die and then leaves the turmeric in the ground for another 10 days or so, because he has observed that water gets extracted out of the turmeric, gets absorbed back into the soil, and you get a more concentrated, better tasting spice. I mean, the irony of that is that it's completely at odds with what the commodity market is looking for. The commodity market wants weight, and so if you want to make more money, you got to make more weight, and so you want to sell your turmeric when it's full of water because you'll make more money. So just the opposition, right there between what the commodity market is looking for and what he wants to be doing, what he believes based on his expertise. And as a
doctor, knows is a better product and a healthier.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And he's doing that even though all of the incentives were pushing him in the other direction. And so we feel really lucky to have found him. I know that he likes working with us.
So awesome.
And it's been a great relationship. We've been working with him for going on 4 years. This will be our fourth our fourth year buying his turmeric.
That is just, oh gosh, I love this. I could talk to you all day long. Like, it's so, so cool. And thank you for doing all that you're doing. I just can't thank you enough. And I hope we do get to go to Africa or anywhere, somewhere. We were trying to do a spice trip, and COVID and everything else just kind of got in the way. But you're such a beautiful soul, Ethan, and what you're doing, I know you don't, nobody takes compliments well, but you are. And what you're doing is huge. It's huge. It's huge from the aspect of taking care of the farmers, from, breaking down this awful system in our food system, and bringing us, the individuals, these amazing spices to experience on our taste buds. So you are literally like fueling and feeding my message to people to get out there and experience flavor, like experience real live sourced flavor, right? We didn't go down this road, and we could probably do a whole nother episode on what all these farmers are telling you about the benefits of their spices and why their spices are better from a health standpoint, right? Like, we're not allowed to talk about that because you're selling spices, not supplements, right? Even though they're taking the same grocery store spices and throwing them in a capsule and calling them a supplement, right? That was what led me to make my spices. I'm like, why aren't we just tasting these things? Why aren't we just experiencing these flavors on our taste buds so that our body can learn, right? That our body can recognize the difference between, I'm telling you, listeners, go to the grocery store, buy some crappy cinnamon, and then get on Burlap and Barrel website and order royal cinnamon, and you will never, ever buy a grocery store cinnamon again. It's like eating dirt in a bad way, not the good dirt. Like it's like dead dirt.
Yeah.
It's really, really insane. The difference that this comes from true life, right? This flavor that comes from life, and not just the life of the product, but the lives of the people that are growing it, and putting the reverence into the soil, and putting the reverence into, these generations of, I have chills. Like, there's just so much importance in what you're doing. So thank you for coming on. Thank you so much for sharing your stories, for doing what you do. Are you able to go out and travel again? Like, are things opening up a
As
little
soon
bit?
as possible. I got to go to Vietnam. I got to go to all kinds of places. I've been very antsy sitting at home, but I will say that the sort of surprising upside of the pandemic has been that we've been able to establish several new sourcing relationships purely remotely, because this very specific situation that you wouldn't really imagine happening all at the same time in a lot of places, but it seems like it has. Adult children wound up back at home with their parents.
Right.
They're more tech savvy than their parents are. They came across our website or found us on social media and reached out. And so we have a shipment of cinnamon quills, hand rolled cinnamon sticks from Sri Lanka, from a single farm, because the farmer's adult daughter, who was living in Colombo, is now back at home on the farm, talking to her dad about how this whole thing works, and realizing that there should be a better way to do it. So she reached out, and the shipment is on a boat somewhere on its way to the US. It's a very similar situation in Grenada, a nutmeg farm where their niece, who normally lives in London, got stuck back in Grenada during a lockdown, couldn't go home, found our website, got in touch, and we have our second shipment of nutmeg coming from them. So kind of shockingly, we've been able to do quite a bit of new sourcing, purely remotely.
Technology. This is where you look at technology and go, okay, technology is an
Yeah.
amazing thing. There's lots of times where I'm like, technology is like the bane of my existence, but just from the beginning of your story, what you said, how you are able to communicate with people around the world through technology, right? And now these younger, more tech savvy people are now able to support their farmers. So cool. So cool.
And Google,
these are the gifts of pandemic,
sorry?
right? These are the gifts of pandemic.
Yeah, we got to look for silver
right?
linings, and this has been a nice one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of pandemic, I'm going to end on this one little note just to prove what an amazing person you are. Ethan is sitting in the home of his grandmother because she's getting her second shot and he wants to take care of her. So, I mean, if that's not proof that this guy is an amazing guy, as if you wouldn't have already figured that out in this whole interview. I just love that. Ethan, thank you. I can't say enough about Burlap and Barrel. We're going to put a link to Burlap and Barrel underneath this interview when we post it on YouTube. And hopefully, if you have watched this episode and you're not clicking on that link, you're just crazy. That's really all there is to it, because the spices are out of this world, and the best way to experience a variety of flavors in your life. So thank you. Maybe we'll have you back again sometime, but I know
I
it's gonna get
I
busy
would
for you, but maybe you could
I
come
would
to
love
our
to.
farm. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to. And thanks for having me on, and thanks for everything that you do to spread the word about flavor and ingredients and sourcing and that connection between health and flavor. I think people don't give themselves enough credit most of the time. They don't trust their palates. They don't think that they know, but when food tastes good, there's a reason.
Yes. Perfect note to end on. Thank you for putting the exclamation point on this episode. All right, Ethan, thank you so much.
Thanks.
We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for having me.